Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you as you file into today's webinar, letting you know we're going to get things going in about a minute from now, just allowing a little more time for everyone to get settled. Thank you for joining us. Again, I want to welcome and thank you all for joining us today. Going to allow about another 30 seconds for everyone to get settled and get filed in. We'll get going in about 30 seconds. Thank you. Okay, an official hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. Workplace incidents, investigations are key to prevention, sponsored by J.J. Keller. My name is Kevin Drewley. I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health Magazine and will be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start a presentation, but first let's review some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and may not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health Magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not necessarily mean the council or magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we'll conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speakers. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and we'll let you know more about that after the presentation. This webcast will be archived so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our speakers today are Ed Zaleski and Joe Proul, who both serve J.J. Keller as environmental, health, and safety editors. Ed is a senior editor who researches and creates content for a variety of safety-related topics while contributing to several products. His specialty areas include walking working surfaces, powered industrial trucks, and injury illness record keeping. Joe is both a certified safety professional and a Six Sigma black belt who joined the EHS content team in 2023. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation. Ed, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. I want to start by saying that this webcast is presented by the J.J. Keller Safety Management Suite. This is finally a solution that works as hard as you do. The Safety Management Suite streamlines compliance at every level of your business, making it easy to develop, implement, and maintain an industry-specific safety program. And because your success is our priority, today's attendees will be offered complimentary access to our compliance tools and resources in the Safety Management Suite. So thank you everyone for joining us. Now, today, obviously, we're going to talk about accident investigations and getting to the root causes. But first, I want to highlight the difference between surface causes and root causes. Now, a surface cause is usually a workplace condition or an employee action that leads to or contributes to an accident. So think of things like water on the floor or using a damaged tool. Well, the problem is, of course, cleaning up the water or replacing that tool won't prevent that situation from happening again. There was something deeper. So the root causes are the factors that allowed that situation to occur. They might be things like inadequate procedures or failure of supervisors to enforce the rules, something like that. Now, correcting root causes is a lot more challenging than just fixing those surface causes, but they do have to be addressed, or you're going to see the same kinds of hazards arise and the same kind of accidents again in the future. Now, OSHA does expect you to identify and eliminate hazards, and that often requires investigating. Now, beyond that, we have talked to a lot of safety professionals who have personal stories involving serious injuries, maybe to a family member. And that's actually what encouraged them to enter the safety profession. You know, my uncle had this or something. So we know that on top of everything else, you want to keep your employees safe. And of course, any serious injury makes people wonder what went wrong. Well, the investigation should answer that question, but finding the root cause helps you answer another very important question: how do we prevent this from happening again? So, as a quick, simple example, if an employee was injured by slipping on ice in the winter, the surface cause would be the ice on the sidewalk, and you can easily fix that, maybe a bit of sand or salt. But root causes, they're usually a system failure. They're usually something that is, process related. So finding the root cause might involve asking questions like, why wasn't this problem identified sooner? Do we need to review our procedures for inspecting sidewalks in the winter? Was the person responsible for doing those inspections maybe on vacation that day and there was no designated backup? And if those root causes can be identified and addressed, then you're in a much better position to prevent future accidents. Now, most accidents, it's true, do result from more than one factor. I mean, the surface causes, they explain how the accident happened. Might be a combination of a behavior and an unsafe condition. But you want to keep digging to look for the why as well as the how. So let me give a quick, easy example of a car accident. Let's say a driver is using a cell phone and drifts out of his lane, causing a minor accident. Well, the analysis seems pretty simple. We'd probably find that using the cell phone distracted the driver, and if he'd stayed focused on the road, the accident probably would have been avoided. So that tells us how it happened. But that next level is determining why was the driver using the cell phone while he was behind the wheel. Now, even if state law doesn't prohibit using a cell phone while driving, I think we all know that this is dangerous. So some potential root causes might be, well, maybe he really didn't know that using a phone while driving is dangerous. Hard to believe someone doesn't know that, but we want to consider the possibility. Or maybe he thought he could use the phone safely while driving. Maybe he'd done it many times before without an accident. That's kind of complacency. So, to prevent future incidents, we might adopt a rule that using a cell phone while driving is prohibited. But there could be larger issues involving distracted driving or even employee attitudes that we might be overlooking. Perhaps this driver knew of the rule and was ignoring it. That would be an issue we have to address. So now, if the driver really didn't know the dangers of using a cell phone while driving, then training might be part of your solution or your entire solution. But if you think he just ignored the danger, well, then you've got some other root cause to uncover. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joe to talk a little bit about investigations.
All right, thanks, Ed. So if you're going to investigate incidents and near misses, you need to be prepared so that you can get on the scene quickly. You might even write a written plan or policy to clarify who is responsible for each part of that investigation. So that's ready to go when it's needed. At a minimum, you'll want a checklist of what to do when you arrive. For example, you may need to take photos or collect air samples, make notes about what records to check. Maybe you need to measure distances or identify witnesses and be ready to document those interviews, things like that. So you're going to want all those tools ready to go to perform those duties. Now, one little trick of the trade with all this great technology and kind of the, Ed's been talking about cell phones, but here's a benefit to cell phones or a smart device is you can download a lot of apps now that can do a lot of these things for you. Dictation, sound dosimeter apps, tape measures, light dosimeters, cameras, videos. Your smart devices can be a big part of that toolkit. The one thing I like to point out and keep in mind is just caution, with personal devices, company policies, privacy. And then also, if there's litigation, there's a discovery period and different things that can occur. So you want to be cognizant of that if you're using a smart device, but they can be very valuable in that investigation process. Additionally, all the people should understand their roles and should be ready to go as soon as they get that call. So they should be able to quickly grab their investigation kit with everything they need to get started. Stepping back, as far as written plans go, if you need help with a written plan, the Safety Management Suite has an accident reporting and investigation plan template. And since Safety Management Suite is sponsoring today's event, we'd like to offer our attendees access to our safety plan templates at no cost. And to help simplify your safety efforts, the J.J. Keller Safety Management Suite offers over 120 pre-written safety plan templates. So basically, you just choose your topic, you fill out the form, and in minutes, you'll have a comprehensive written plan that's built specifically for your unique business. So go ahead, use the poll on your screen. And along with that, we're going to give you access not only to those free safety plans in the site, but we're also going to email you our white paper, OSHA Workplace Injury and Illness Record Keeping. So go ahead, fill out that poll. And while you're doing that, just a reminder again, if you have those questions, please use that Q&A option on the screen and get those questions in there for us. All right. So of course, everyone on the investigation should be trained. And there are lengthy courses available specifically on this, so we won't cover all those details today. They're quite lengthy. But obviously, the investigators will need to understand their responsibilities. So to start, they're going to need to know when and how to start an investigation. And this may sound simple, but for example, what if you get a near miss report? Or what if the investigator at the time is in a meeting? When should that investigation start? Now, if an employee was injured and sent to a hospital, pretty simple. That investigation, would probably start immediately. But what if that near miss could have caused the hospitalization? It didn't, but it could have. There might be a serious hazard that needs to be addressed right away. The point is, don't delay the investigation of a serious hazard just because the injury was not that serious. It could have been. That's a key to remember. It could have been. I like to say a near miss is valuable. It's like a warning shot, right? But the next time it might be on target. Additionally, team members also need to know what to look for, how to gather evidence, how to document those findings, how to report out, and also how to offer some corrective actions to prevent future incidents of a similar nature. Another really important component to getting this all to work right is consider training all your employees about the investigation process. So not just the investigators. Let them know that if an incident or a near miss happens, the company is going to investigate. Give them that heads up. Let them know also that the purpose of the investigation is not to assign blame. Okay, that's very important, not to assign blame. The purpose is to prevent future incidents so they or their coworkers don't get hurt. You might want to reassure them that if they witness an incident, they'll be interviewed, but that doesn't mean they're in trouble. Go over the process so everyone understands, make it clear. Tell them how and why these investigations are going to be conducted. Tell them what kind of questions will be asked, and then also importantly, how that information will be used. These discussions will really help reassure them and make them more willing to participate, which is the key to this whole process. So this might also be a good time to remind everyone that preventing incidents before they have a chance to hurt someone is better than investigating incidents after the fact. Very important. Also remind them how important it is to report any hazards or concerns they see before they have to act as a witness. So if they're leery about that, report those early, and then getting a little bit more proactive in our safety culture. So with that, I'll send it back to Ed.
Thank you, Joe. One thing along with that, if you provide training for everyone, consider explaining why you investigate accidents. And Joe kind of just touched on this. Obviously, identifying and eliminating hazards are major reasons. You want to keep your workers safe. So again, we're not looking to place blame. But investigating also shows your company's concern for safety. This is an opportunity to highlight your commitment to protecting workers, to make sure they go home safe every day. So you might explain that an injury means that something went wrong. It doesn't mean the employee was to blame, but you want to know what went wrong. You want to know why, so you can stop it from happening again and stop someone else from getting injured. Accidents aren't always the employee's fault, but some employees, well, they think they're going to be held responsible or maybe even get fired. Let them know that if they didn't intend to cause injury, they didn't intend to hurt someone. Yeah, intentional like would be starting a fight or something. That might be a little different under your policy. But if this was really an accident, then your focus will be on training or other safeguards to protect everyone, again, by preventing future accidents. Okay, so knowing all of that, we're going to go through some investigation steps. The first is to control the scene. Make sure no one else is in danger, but you do want to preserve the scene so you can figure out what happened. We don't want evidence moved and things like that. This might include things like blocking off that area to isolate a danger if there's still a hazard, and of course, keep unauthorized people out. And then the next step is collecting that evidence, taking photos, even drawing sketches, maybe with measurements on clearances and distances. How far away was something? You might need information on the position of tools or equipment, housekeeping conditions that might have changed, like water on the floor. Air quality could be an issue, background noise levels. There could be other factors like that. And of course, you're going to start interviewing employees. You're going to check records for things like maintenance or previous inspections. You'll probably check your injury logs to see if you had similar cases in the past or any reports of near miss incidents. Anything that might relate to that accident and help you identify, of course, both the surface causes as well as the root causes. Now, collecting evidence should focus on the facts. That seems obvious, but it is normal for your brain to start connecting dots, to start drawing conclusions. And we want to avoid assumptions about what happened because that can cause you to overlook something important. And that relates to conducting interviews. We want to simply ask what happened and let the witness tell the story in their own words. So, open ended questions like, describe what happened or tell me what happened next. You want to avoid leading questions. Those might cause someone to make something up, or a leading question can suggest a specific answer. One example might be, so do you think he wasn't paying attention? A question like that might even sound like an accusation. It can put the witness on the defensive. It can change their response. And remember that statements from multiple witnesses, well, they might sound contradictory. And you think, well, both of these cannot possibly be true. That doesn't necessarily mean that one or the other is lying. It could just be how they honestly remember the events. Maybe they saw things from different angles or something. But as we're going to discuss a little later, it might be that one of the witnesses is perhaps trying to deflect a little bit of the blame if they think they're going to get blamed. So I'm going to go back to Joe to talk a little bit about interview questions.
All right, sounds great, Ed. So one thing is, interviewing those direct witnesses, but you might need to also interview people who are not directly involved or who didn't even see the incident. An example of this is the worker's supervisor, but some coworkers might also have some information crucial to this investigation. So to get the most out of interviews, you may need to understand some basic psychology. Again, you don't want to ask leading questions or make accusations, but it is worth noting that people being interviewed might not be entirely forthcoming either, especially if someone was seriously injured. Some witnesses might try to downplay their responsibility or even try to deflect that responsibility. Also, something else to consider, some people may be reluctant to say something negative about a coworker or supervisor. These are their coworkers or buddies. They might not flat out say that someone else made a mistake or could have done something better. So let's take a look at some examples. So suppose that a forklift operator stopped suddenly and the load they were carrying slid off the tines, nearly striking a pedestrian. So you might hear some statements like this: I didn't see the forklift. Or maybe, boy, that pedestrian just came out of nowhere. Now, that may be how the witness remembers things, but there's probably something else going on here. So follow-up questions might be along the lines of, well, what were you focused on at the time of the incident? Maybe the pedestrian was checking their cell phone. Here's that cell phone coming back again, and didn't see or hear the forklift. Or maybe the forklift was going too fast. Maybe the driver failed to stop and sound the horn at an intersection. Like we said before, there could be several contributing factors, and you're going to want to identify all of them, as many of them as you can. This is where interviews with coworkers might really help identify a pattern of behavior. Maybe others have reported the forklift going too fast, or maybe another worker had a near miss. This is a key component, if done correctly, in determining that true cause. Along the same lines, Ed alluded to this one, watch for that possible blame shifting. So what does that mean? For example, the forklift operator might say, well, the forklift couldn't stop in time, rather than just saying, I was driving too fast. A statement that the forklift couldn't stop is an effort to shift blame to that machine itself. Even a statement like, the load was unstable, it shows that the operator recognized the problem, but they're probably not going to say I was carrying that unstable load. So it's a natural human tendency to shift blame from ourselves, and that's okay. You don't need to press the issue during the interviews, but it's something to keep in mind when you as the investigator are going over those interview notes. So as we said earlier, people may be reluctant to blame a coworker or a supervisor or even blame themselves, but if you keep getting responses like, I don't remember, or I don't know, keep in mind, maybe the witness really doesn't remember, but they might be attempting to avoid some responsibility or avoid blaming someone else. And with that, back to Ed.
All right, since we've introduced a scenario here, I'm going to give a similar example. And so here's the situation, kind of like what Joe just went through. A forklift driver is going too fast, and while going around a corner, an unbalanced load slid off the tines. I actually had this happen to me like 30 years ago when I was a forklift driver. Now, let's say no one was injured, but the incident gets reported as a near miss because it could have caused serious injury. Now, I admit I've jumped ahead a little bit because I've already identified all my surface causes. I'm saying the operator's carrying an unstable load and the operator was going too fast. But asking why those conditions occurred might be a little more complicated. Why was the operator going too fast? Why was he carrying an unstable load? Now, I love forklift examples because OSHA requires retraining the operator if they were involved in an accident or near miss. So, as I kind of hinted earlier, you should absolutely consider if training was a factor. I mean, maybe the operator didn't know safe speeds or couldn't recognize an unstable load. But in a lot of these cases, I think you've all experienced, it's possible that production demands maybe, shall we say, encouraged the operator to cut some safety corners. Maybe he knew the load was unstable, but thought he didn't have time to secure it. Maybe the manager had observed the operator driving too fast before, but never enforced the rules, or worse, said they were going too slow and needed to speed up. So, these issues get to the why the accident happened. And a lot of these involve human factors or motivations for unsafe behaviors. When people behave unsafe, they have a reason for it. They have a motive. There's some incentive there. So if the operator is given refresher training because of the near miss, but those root causes don't get addressed, well, you're probably not going to resolve the issue and there could be another accident or similar situation occurring. Now, again, we're talking about the investigation. It should include reviews of the operator's training records, maybe even their disciplinary records, interviews with the manager and others in the area. As Joe has said, might identify a pattern of unsafe behavior. And honestly, if these interviews suggest a pattern of unsafe behavior, there should be documentation that the operator was given reminders, told to slow down, was given refresher training. So if you identify an ongoing problem, but you have no evidence or witness statements that the problem was ever addressed, you got a larger issue that's got to be fixed. And so we sometimes hold the employee accountable for accidents. There's a very common blame the employee issue. But if the supervisor is not enforcing the rules and the employee is even being encouraged to do something inappropriate, well, maybe the supervisor shares some of that responsibility. And as I said, if the supervisor has even berated the driver for going too slow or taking too much time, well, that creates incentives for the employee, doesn't it? Retraining the operator is not going to fix that root cause. Hey, in this case, maybe part of that root cause is that the manager needs some retraining. All right, back to Joe to talk about evidence.
Thanks, Ed. So once all the evidence is collected, the next steps are really easy to list, but they can be hard to do. So they include things like going over that data to determine the root causes, reading between the lines, communicating those findings, developing and implementing those corrective actions, and then monitoring the corrections to make sure they are working, to make sure that they're effective. We do want to highlight the importance of monitoring the corrective action to make sure it's effective, and also that it isn't creating any new or different hazards. As an example, if the solution was changing to a different type of personal protective equipment, well, you're going to want to ensure, one thing that I found in my experience is you're going to want to ensure that the PPE is actually being used and that it solved the problem and then it doesn't cause new problems. In this example of PPE, maybe it's uncomfortable or something and people are just choosing not to wear it. You got to be kind of enforcing that. So of course, the corrective actions will depend on the hazards and even the resources available. So for instance, rather than trying a new type of PPE, we should be looking at possible engineering controls or work practice controls, because those are more effective at removing the exposure to the hazard than PPE. And really, the root causes will influence the type of corrective actions. But don't just think about those physical causes. You should also think about motivational causes. So those are going to be harder to identify and correct, but they will need to be fixed. Otherwise, the root causes will still be a factor, and they're going to cause future incidents. So many of you have probably heard of the 5 whys, a great tool. You may need to ask why questions several times to really drill down to a root cause. This is a really effective method. So let's use an example. We had an incident where a custodial worker fell. The first question we're probably going to ask is, why did the employee fall? Well, the custodial worker slipped on a wet floor. Okay, so I'm scratching my head. Well, why was the floor wet? Well, it turns out there's a leaky pipe. Okay, so why wasn't the pipe reported or fixed? Well, they didn't know how to report or they didn't know how to report or how to get that report done. Things like that. So it keeps going like this till we get down to that root cause. So again, corrective actions like retraining may be necessary, but you may still need to work with the manager to ensure that the training gets reinforced on a daily basis. So as a manager, I may need to reinforce how it's everyone's responsibilities to report issues. So if I have a leaky pipe, it's everybody's responsibility. Get that report in. Or maybe it's a case of the mechanism to report those issues. So they were uncomfortable using whatever neat program we had, and we may need to do some additional training. And with that, I'll send it back to Ed.
Thanks, Joe. All right, so when you do a root cause analysis, what exactly are you looking for? Well, you should be looking for physical conditions, of course, but you should also be looking at employee actions and the motivations for those actions. So if a surface cause was an equipment failure, the root cause might include a lack of maintenance or the failure to follow a safety feature that was supposed to protect the employees in case of breakdown. And as I said, while we want to avoid blaming the employee, we recognize a lack of attention, not paying attention, lack of focus, that can certainly be a factor. But as with that forklift driver carrying an unstable load, was the real cause what was the motivation for that? Was the employee not properly trained? Or was he under production pressure and encouraged to take shortcuts? And I can tell you as a driver, having carried an unstable load, you know it. You watching that thing bounce and hoping it doesn't fall over. You're fully aware of it. So, the point is we can acknowledge that the employee's actions certainly played a role, but that doesn't mean we place all the blame on the employee, especially if we can find some motive why the employee did this, because they have a reason. And now we've listed the step as in our investigation process of communicating the investigation results and the step of identifying possible corrective actions. We're trying to go through all those investigation steps first, and we got more to get to. So correcting or in results, which comes first here? Well, depending on your company policy, or maybe even depending on the seriousness of the incident, you might recommend some corrections, or you might report the findings to a group and work together on developing corrective actions. It really depends on who needs to be involved when implementing those corrections. I know as a safety person, you're not the only one responsible for implementing. There may be cost issues to consider, things like that. So you may have to have a group discussion to identify solutions and who's going to pay for them and to assign responsibility for implementing them. Now, I've hinted a bunch of times, and I don't pick on supervisors. It may sound like it, but I've hinted that a supervisor might need to take a more active role when enforcing safety rules and discouraging shortcuts. And that can be a perfectly legitimate corrective action. But again, it's probably not something that you as a safety professional can implement all on your own. Now, your report or investigation summary will then describe the incident along with any interim steps taken to protect employees. You may have to take steps until a full process can be addressed. You're also going to document your suspected causes, including both the surface and root causes. Now, those findings should be supported by documentation. It might be maintenance records, statements from witness interviews, whatever that is. And then again, you'll probably have some recommended actions to prevent this problem from recurring again. Now, to give an example, let's suppose an employee suffered an eye injury because he wasn't wearing safety glasses. However, your investigations finds that he was trained he gets the PPE training every year. He did in fact see signs that said safety glasses were required. Maybe he even had his safety glasses with him in his pocket. All right, well, why didn't he wear them? Well, maybe he felt the rules didn't apply to him. Maybe those glasses were uncomfortable or they kept fogging up, so he took them off. So in this case, the solution might be something like a new type of safety glasses with anti-fog lenses or treatments. And again, part of that, there might be other reminders, but that's one way to find a root cause. You need to know what the motive was. And with that, we're going back to Joe for a bit.
All right, I'm back. So this is probably my favorite slide, but when you're suggesting corrective actions, you always want to use the hierarchy of controls. And we can see on the screen, and I'm going to list them off. Number one, eliminate the hazard. Substitute, engineering controls, administrative work practice controls, PPE. And again, at the bottom there, may need change that more than one level. Okay. This means if we follow the hierarchy of controls, we're always starting at eliminating the hazard, if possible. So for example, do we really need that hazardous chemical, or could some other product be used? Or can we install engineering controls such as ventilation and get rid of some respiratory protection requirements? If we can do that, can we use, if we can't do that, can we use administrative controls? And then as a last line of defense, we talk about PPE, then PPE should be used. And some people are surprised sometimes that PPE is considered the last line of defense. Why is that? Well, PPE is dependent on the human element. We have to depend on the human to wear that PPE properly and to wear it when they're supposed to. So it's the least controlled version of the hierarchy of controls. Keep in mind then, you may need to implement changes at more than one level, depending on those root causes. So for example, maybe the workers need a new type of safety glasses, but the manager also needs training on enforcing those rules, or maybe a change to the environmental systems to keep those glasses from fogging up, like in our previous example. So causes and corrections, let's swing around here a little bit. Let's say you found an unguarded machine caused an injury. Okay, obviously you'll need to guard the machine according to the applicable OSHA standard, but you'll have a number of other questions to address. And these really include, why was it unguarded? Or why was the guard removed? Okay, I probably can count on more than one hand how many times I've seen that. Why did workers use an unguarded machine? Was the supervisor aware of this? Do you need more walkthrough inspections, more worker training, a different type of guard? Who's responsible? Who's accountable? All of these questions come up in this situation. These are all factors that are really going to influence the type of corrective actions that we evaluate and want to implement. So once you've chosen the corrective actions, you'll need to implement them. And depending on the changes needed, you'll want to set up a timeline along with any interim steps. So what does that mean? Well, for example, if training is going to be part of this solution, it's going to need to be scheduled and delivered. Okay, the hazard, may still be there. So workers will need to be protected until they get trained. So what needs to happen in the interim? You'll also need to assign responsibilities for implementing those changes and for evaluating if they're effective. And this evaluation could be over a period of days, weeks, or even months. Commonly, from my experience, we had a standard kind of 30, 60, 90 scenario. But something to keep in mind that when you're looking at these changes, they may not seem effective, or they may seem very effective at first, but over time, new issues could arise that may need to be addressed. I'll go back to those safety glasses again. They're not being worn, or they're fogging up, so people aren't wearing them. You may not see that on day one, but that's why we have to reevaluate their effectivity. And also, these corrective measures should fix the hazard and prevent reoccurrence. And someone will need to make sure that the new process is also consistently followed from that point forward. So when you're looking to assign accountability, and I know people probably hear that word and probably start cringing a little bit, but it's so important. And some things to consider when we're considering who's accountable. What does that mean? Well, who has the authority to make changes? Who's going to monitor those changes? And who will be authorized to address any problems or concerns? As an example, in some cases, you might find that the corrective actions are not working as well as you hoped, and you'll need to evaluate other options and really following that kind of that path of continuous improvement. Back to you, Ed.
Thanks, Joe. All right, we're getting back up to some of my favorite part here, which are the motivational causes. So over these next few slides, we're going to give examples of some motivations that you might encounter, and we'll offer some ideas for how you might address some of them. Now, I've listed them here, and these are some of the human factors that we've been talking about. Now, as with any other root cause, fixing these is not easy. And when you're trying to deal with human behaviors, it won't be quick either. For a lot of these, you're going to need buy in to make changes. And let's face it, entire books have been written on that. But, the short answer is we call this getting buy in because you need to sell your ideas. You need to convince others to buy them, that is, to adopt them as their own and follow them. So basically, you need to lay out the reasons that a change is needed and show everyone the value of that change. You want to anticipate likely objections, and then you'll be prepared to address those objections because when you implement change, I'm sure all of you have heard there's going to be objections. Now, ideally, you'll be able to show how this change makes things better. It should reduce injuries, but if it has any other benefits, highlight those as well. So, one possible cause, lack of attention. When we do the same task over and over and over again, well, your mind tends to wander a little bit, especially if it's a simple task, and then we're not paying full attention to the job. Honestly, if you've ever been driving and then had a moment where you realize you don't remember the last few seconds on the highway, you've experienced this. It might be that you didn't forget, but you just weren't. You were surprised by a car in your blind spot or something. Well, this lack of focus, it happens to people at work. And honestly, that's one possible reason why a forklift driver might say a pedestrian came out of nowhere, didn't see him. Paying strict attention all day is tough, especially for routine and repetitive tasks, or for duties like driving that require you to focus on several different things at the same time, right? Operating a forklift, you're watching for pedestrians, you're watching the load, you're watching a whole lot of other things. And in some cases there can be an external distraction. We often get questions like, well, can our employees listen to music while they're wearing hearing protection, maybe in their headphones? Usually that's not a good idea because it's a distraction and because the music could prevent the worker from hearing a warning. Now, all you can really do here is eliminate distractions as much as possible and kind of remind workers to give their full attention to what they're doing. And particularly as they move from perhaps a less hazardous to a more hazardous task, you need to really up your attention and refocus at that point because you've just gotten more dangerous. Another one we hear a lot about is complacency. I've been asked that a lot. How do we deal with people who are just ignoring the rules? I call this the nothing bad happened syndrome, where people say, well, nothing bad happened last time, so they do the same thing again. Well, addressing complacency is, again, going to require an ongoing effort with continual reminders. Well, one good way to explain it to people, to your team, is to use distracted driving. I mean, most likely, some, maybe all of your employees, they checked their phone, they adjusted the radio, maybe they were snacking on their drive-through food, and they suddenly realized they drifted out of their lane. They divided their focus. They needed all their focus on driving. Thing is, if they didn't cause an accident, they tend to do the same thing again, maybe a few days or weeks later. That's the nothing bad happened. That's the complacency we're talking about. Well, a good reason this is an interesting way to explain it is they probably get angry when other drivers do that, right? So ask them, how do you feel when you see another driver talking on the phone and almost drift into the side of your car? Probably makes them angry, right? This is a rhetorical question. We don't need a specific answer. But the point is to make them think, why are you doing something that you know is unsafe and you make get very angry when other people do the exact same thing? It's just a way to make them think a little bit. And again, changing habits, it's not easy. There's no simple solution. Again, continual reminders are going to be needed. You might have daily meetings on this about complacency. You might post signs. We'll get some support from coworkers and supervisors. The thing is, one way to address this is to make things seem real. They need to understand the real risk, right? Risk sometimes doesn't feel real until an accident happened. And if any of you listening have had a serious accident in the workplace, suddenly things get very real and very serious really quickly. Um, we want to tell our employees we want to get rid of that complacency. We want this to feel real before that serious accident happens. Okay. Another possible root cause is peer pressure. There's often peer pressure to work faster, and that often involves taking shortcuts. And to use that driving example again, if you're on the freeway, most everyone goes a little bit above the speed limit. My wife likes to joke, it's supposed to be a speed limit, but we all think of it, it's really a starting point. um, so you go with the flow, you go with the flow of traffic. And this can happen with safety sometimes also, where when the flow starts going faster, everybody moves along with it. And the person who's going slow, boy, you notice right away. So there can be peer pressure. Now, we hinted earlier that supervisors could be a source of that pressure. So even if they aren't discouraging employees from working safely, they might not be actively encouraging safety. And so those continual reminders are needed. Now, how you address this can vary, but employers do have some control over the type of peer pressure in the workplace. A lot of it has to do with training on the importance of safety, showing that safety is a value for the company, explaining the costs of accidents, and so on. But beyond that, I mean, it really comes down to not tolerating rule violations. And I would add, not sending mixed messages. A mixed message is work as quickly and safely as possible. Well, there's going to come a time when employees feel like they have to choose. Am I going to work safe or am I going to work fast? We want that emphasis to be on the right things. And I'm going to go through one more and then I'll pass it back to Joe a bit. Another one is resistance to change. So, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard this. I've been doing it this way for 30 years and never had a problem. So don't tell me you've only been here 6 months or you've only been here 5 years. Getting workers to accept changes can be very difficult. And I realize, especially with your most senior workers. So here's an option to try. Instead of telling them they have to change, try requesting that they make a change. I know it's not optional, but rather than saying you have to do it this way, take the approach of I'd like you to try something different. And again, your senior workers might be more likely to accept a request rather than a demand, especially as you get through the next few steps. Now, first, I know some people are going to object. We talked about that earlier. So you need to validate their objections. You can't dismiss them. So if someone says, well, it's going to take longer, you can agree, it might take longer. We don't know, but we want you to try it anyway and see how it goes. So by acknowledging that objection, it's better than dismissing it. If you say, don't worry about that, what they're hearing is, my opinion's not important. So you do need to address it and don't dismiss it. Once you got through the objections, the last step is to tell them, hey, we'd really appreciate your help evaluating this new process. And after a month, we're going to get your feedback on how it works and if it could be improved. Are you willing to help us for this? So instead of demanding that they do something, you're asking for their experience, you're asking for their help to evaluate something new. And most of them are going to say yes. Maybe they'll think they're going to prove that it doesn't work, but at least they'll give it a try. And honestly, when you come back after a few weeks or a month, and if they have suggestions, say, hey, great, let's make those suggestions and we'll run this for another month. Once you've got them using the new process for a couple of months, it should become a new habit. And especially hopefully they've discovered it did not slow things down. Maybe it did make things better. And now you've got their buy-in for the change. All right, back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Ed. Love that. Love that. So we've mentioned the role that supervisors play a number of times, and they're that day-to-day contact for your employees. And supervisors, they have a huge impact on safety, probably one of the most impactful roles. But in many cases, both the workers and the managers are given annual performance reviews based on productivity with little or no direct recognition for safety. So your executive team might have used the phrase, what gets measured gets done, right? If your company is measuring and rewarding productivity, but you're not recognizing or measuring safety, then you can guess where employees and supervisors are going to focus most of their attention. So maybe a supervisor tells employees to work faster, but never really recognizes them for working effectively, but also following those safety rules, or doesn't enforce the rules. Supervisors need to ensure that work gets done on time, but they also need to ensure, get measured, and recognized for their safety records for their departments. Okay, we kind of got away from the investigation focus for a bit, but we think that knowing some of those possible root causes, motivations will help you really conduct a better investigation. We wanted to point out that some root causes may need to be addressed at the corporate level, at the higher levels. Upper management may want to blame employees, okay, which is something we talked about earlier. Although employees do have some responsibility, the root cause for their behavior may come from a higher level. And there's a whole branch of learning on this, something called systems safety. The system itself is what creates, your organization. And if that is the case, then you'll need upper management to help support the change to that system and really help move that safety culture in that proactive and positive direction. So in the end, the purpose of investigating is truly to identify and address root causes so you can prevent future incidents. Prevention doesn't have to wait for an incident or even a near miss. Keep this in mind. You might already be aware of some of those motivational causes we discussed. So don't wait until that injury happens. If you can start addressing those now, start noting those now. And like we mentioned earlier, preventing incidents is always better than investigating incidents. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper. So there may be conditions, behaviors, motivations, lack of enforcement, or multitude of other factors that are currently a problem in some areas. If possible, start fixing those causes before an incident occurs.
All right, I think we're back to me. And, prevention is key and analyzing incident trends is important. So we want to give you the opportunity to check out our incident center in the safety management suite. If you didn't elect for free access to our compliance tools and resources in safety management suite, we're giving you another opportunity to do so. The incident center helps you track injuries, illnesses, near misses, property damage, and much more. You can analyze your trends using interactive charts. You can auto-generate the OSHA Form 300, 300A, and 301 reports. So we're having that poll up. And again, along with the free access, complimentary access, we'll email you our white paper on OSHA workplace injury and illness record keeping. And I want to go on to the questions that we've had coming in, but first I want to give our moderator a chance to weigh in.
Well, excellent. Great job, Ed and Joe. Thanks so much for sharing your insights and your expertise. Before we do start the Q&A, just want to let everyone know about the evaluation survey that we're asking you to complete. That survey will open in a different screen following the webinar. And as always, your input is very important as it helps us to improve our future webcasts. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button to submit. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the next 10 minutes or so, but if we don't get to yours today, all unanswered questions will be forwarded along to our speakers. And let's now get started. First question asks, how can we interview coworkers without violating the privacy of the injured employee?
Joe, do you want to start on that one, or do you want me to grab that one?
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, so one of the things we get asked a lot on interviews. Obviously, interviews should be conducted in a private location. We want to do interviews one-on-one. We want to do them in a secure area, away from eyes and ears. You do not generally want the employee's supervisor in the room, but also coworkers, right? Because they may have things to say about each other, and so but what they're saying is not, it's not secret. It's not confidential. Um, we don't want to share what they've said or done with others, but there may be cases where some of that has to be shared. I used to work a little bit more on the human resources side of things, where you would do things like sexual harassment investigations. As you can imagine, you want to keep that information as confidential as possible, and especially accusations. But there does come a point sometimes where you need to you need to give information that might reveal the person who made the statement. So obviously, if you're going to give an accused harasser an opportunity to respond, you have to describe the incident, and they probably have a pretty good idea of who reported it at that point. So confidentiality can be lost, but that doesn't mean we're in an accident investigation. It doesn't mean that we're placing blame here or we're revealing anything. We can say, well, we have information on a second or third interview. We have information that this appears to have been the situation. Can you comment on that? And it may allow the person to recognize who made the prior statement, but sometimes that's unavoidable. And again, as long as we're not throwing accusations around, we should be okay. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Kind of on a similar vein as far as disclosure, the question asks, should we get a written statement from witnesses?
I think we both agree you should get written statements from witnesses, and having them write it out in their own words is ideal. If they absolutely refuse to do so, and again, this came from harassment complaints, people didn't want to put it in writing. What you would do is write down their statement. Take notes, write it down as much as possible, and then you can go back to the person later and say, could you look over this statement and then sign it or initial it to see if everything's accurate? Make any corrections and initial it. Even if someone wrote it up, if the employee reviews it and says, yes, this is accurate, and signs it, you basically have a written statement. So that's kind of a little way to do an end run. I hope that helps too.
Next question asks, how do you adjust investigation steps when there's an ergonomics related incident report?
I can take this one, Ed. So yeah, great question. So a lot of the steps really are very similar. I mean, you're still going to be, you know, putting together your kits, walking out to, the incident. So say, for example, someone comes in and the injury is, I have a back injury, a lower back injury. Well, in that case, you're still going to be going out to their work area, assessing what's going on in that area, talking to maybe coworkers in that area. The tools themselves, what's different? The tools themselves may change. You may be using some different types of investigative tools. Maybe it's more of analysis, such as like a NIOSH lifting equation, the REBA analysis, some more of those types of tools to figure out what's going on. In addition to talking to, again, those coworkers and others that are in the area, you may find out some very valuable information about how this person has to manipulate products or move products, because maybe you find that's becoming kind of the reason for the injury. So it really doesn't change you still investigate, you still prepare yourselves to get out on the shop floor. When we talk about does it need to be immediate, well, if this person got injured, a back injury, and back injuries can be long-term, very expensive, it's definitely one that we want to go out and assess right away. So the steps themselves are very similar. You just may be looking at it in a different way. And some of those ways, again, are those different tools that you may be using to analyze what occurred.
Well, thank you. Next question now asks, can you give some examples on system safety on the corporate level?
So I'll jump in here, Ed. So as far as systems safety goes, kind of what we want to understand there is the fact that there's more than one kind of component to why we do things in our organization. And you can take any process and a system safety, let's just say systems itself. Your organization is a system, and there's so many different intertwining entities in that system to make something happen. And that's similar with safety components. When something happens, there's a reason for it, and there's other components to that. So I'm going to throw one here kind of relating to ergonomics. I'm thinking about it. And say, for example, we have some operators who come in and say, you know, I hurt my back. We have one come in the next day, I hurt my back. And we go out and we investigate and we find they're moving, you know, maybe boxes from point A to point B. Okay, and that's what's happening in their little area. Okay, but the reason they're moving those boxes is related to the entire manufacturing system itself. Okay, we set up this product to run it in this quantity, and we put it in this size box because that size box is easy for someone to handle and pick up. Okay, there's a whole system of things going on here. And this is just a really brief example. I could talk about this for hours. But where I'm going with this is we look at it at a systems level. We say, wait a second, my person got hurt because they're moving this box with this amount of widgets in it because our manufacturing system said this is the most effective because our customer orders in this type of quantity. So we can go all the way back and look at that cause again, why we are doing what we're doing. And so we look at the system safety, and we say, how do we change the system now in order to present a product or a process that's safer for our workers? And in this case here, I'm just going to throw this out. We determined that, you know what, we're going to put everything in one larger box that a person can't lift, so they can't move this box. And now we're moving it in a different way. We eliminated the exposure to lifting and manipulating that smaller box. But that's just a real brief example for our time frame here. I love to talk system safety. You could talk about it more in depth. Ed, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
All right. Next question relates to buy-in. It asks, how do you get senior management to buy into critiquing their policies or procedures instead of just blaming the employee?
Oh, I'm going to grab that to start. And I really wish we could give you this. It's real easy. You just do this and your senior management will have your buy-in. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You know, one thing is that explain if people are doing things unsafe, and we kind of hinted at this earlier, there's a reason for it. Okay. Decisions made by people might not make any sense to observers, but to the person making that decision, it is rational. It can seem irrational. Maybe they're acting on incomplete information. Maybe they're acting on incorrect information or based on incentives or motives that have been communicated to that get this done as quickly as possible. But whatever it is, there is a rational decision-making process there. So we need to change that motive. So when you're blaming the employee, we need to look back why, or it's kind of the 5 whys. Okay, employees are being unsafe. Why are they being unsafe? And it's not because they're idiots who don't care if they get hurt. There's something going on there. The other thing to look at is if you're trying to deal with senior management, the more areas you can cover, the better. Okay, so and by that I mean, yeah, we talk about we want to save money, we want to lower our workers' comp costs. We also want to increase our company's reputation. We want to reduce our risk and of for violations. We want to be able to highlight that we're a safe company to increase our chances of recruiting and reducing turnover. So you can talk to, as the more areas you can touch on, the more likely you are to get different people on board. The HR person might be more interested in reducing turnover and increasing their public reputation. The CEO might be interested in costs, whatever it is. The more people you can get on board, the more likely you are to get them going there. Joe, I kind of talked fast there. Anything you want to add?
Ed, I just hit the easy button. No, I think you covered it. You covered it really well. So no, that was excellent. Excellent.
All right. Well, no, you both covered quite a bit of ground today, and unfortunately, we have run out of time. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions, but again, all of today's unanswered questions will be forwarded along to our speaker. Once again, we hope you take the time to fill out that forthcoming evaluation survey and give us your feedback. With that, we end today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. We'd like to thank Ed Zaleski, Joe Proul, everyone at JJ Keller, and all of you who listened in. Thanks and have a great day.